With me today is Jesse Sharratt, co-founder and COO of LAUFT, the most flexible on-demand network of space designed for people with the freedom to work from anywhere. Jesse, welcome to Say Hi to the Future.
Thank you very much for having me, Ken. I really appreciate being here.
So Jesse, we're just chatting a little bit. You're now on the east coast of Canada, or you returned to the east coast of Canada, overlooking beautiful ocean. Where do you choose to work from?
Yeah, so I relocated back to the East Coast almost 4 or 5 years ago now. I work primarily from home. I've got a bit of a longer commute now up to Toronto and now Ottawa, where we just opened a new workspace. But yeah, it's been a nice adjustment for me. I've always been someone who loves the ocean and being close to my family. So getting to come back to my roots has been really nice. And yeah, my son has been born out here, and my life's here now. So it's a treat to get to be back and smell that ocean air every day.
Well, it is, and as you said, I mean, for those of us, those of you who can work from wherever you want, it's really a wonderful thing, a different quality of life to take advantage of.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. I mean, one of the greatest things of the way we work today is that we all have supercomputers in our pockets. We're all connected no matter where we
Right.
go. And, we like to think that the work happens in an office, but, I've been taking phone calls on my walk to daycare this morning and, sending emails on the bus. So, you really can work from anywhere, and technology has enabled so much of that.
Well, it's funny, and in some ways it's not funny. But a few years ago, well, early pandemic, I was doing a lot of online workshops, and I had a group of very large building owners, like tall offices and whatnot, and I said to them, what if people don't return to the office? And they said, well, of course they're going to return. I said, okay, but what if they don't? I said, of course they're going to return, and they're just going to be told to return. And they called me a few choice names and weren't very impressed. I don't know if they remember the call, but I do very well. I don't think everyone's returned.
No, certainly not. And, people historically love being told what to do. So I can certainly understand why that gets a few backs up. I think, yeah, there's been a great distribution that's happened. And, it's pretty exciting to see how people have reclaimed a bit more autonomy over their days. The 9 to 5 monolith has always been something we all work around. And now with all of these tools that we have, we can really integrate our work and our life a lot better to kind of serve both sides. Um, so I think it's an exciting time. It's certainly concerning when, you have a lot of office towers that you want to see filled.
Right.
But I think there's a reimagining happening that's exciting too. And, it's a great way to kind of picture the future of cities. So yeah, RTO, it's not so much a debate, I would say, is much more a reimagining of an experience that serves both employees and employers alike.
Well, I like that reimagine because it's not just these spaces from the employer employee. It's like, what are we going to do with these spaces? How are we going to use them?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what we're seeing is groups that are wanting to downsize their spaces or go into sort of a fractional office and sharing. There's been a huge push for improved housing options as well. So there's a lot of ways that we can reimagine how we use this vital real estate in the downtown cores. Um, so I'm excited to see what happens. I think flex space is definitely a huge part of it. And really, the thing that we're most focused on is creating experiences within the buildings where we operate.
Right. Do you think this happens or is happening the same in large cities as much as sort of the medium to small? And what I mean is, I mean, my kids were well, one was in Manhattan at the start of the pandemic in a tiny place and was able to get back in, sort of break, I think 6, 8 months in, and the other two in Toronto. So, moving out of those very large cities and those tiny cramped spaces and 70, 80, whatever story buildings, I totally get. Um, but you're sitting in, a really beautiful open part um, of Canada. I mean, cities, I get their cities a bit smaller, a bit more open. And I also know from my friends who are still there, I mean, you've got a lot of condos, a lot of growth on the Halifax side, and they're going, oh my God, look at this traffic. And I'm going, there's three cars in front of me.
Well, you haven't been here when they closed the bridge. It's been a bit of a traffic nightmare this last little bit, but yeah, I mean,
But is it happening? Is it happening everywhere? Or is it just a few major urban centers?
I think it's happening everywhere. I think, people are looking at how to streamline some of their lives, especially when it comes to commuting. And, when people were touched by this social experiment of work from home, remote work that COVID initiated for, millions and millions of people, they realized, wow, I don't have to commute 2 hours every day. In Toronto, the average commute time is 2 hours. That's 10 hours a week.
Right.
You're basically an extra day or two of work. That you're spent just going back and forth, spending gas, wear and tear on your car, the potholes, the frustration, the stress. I mean, when I used to live in Toronto for the better part of a decade, and commuting up to Yonge and Eglinton from where I lived to go to work would take me over an hour every day. And by the time I
Wow.
would get there, I was sweaty and stressed and, felt like I'd been squished in like a sardine. And, instead now my lifestyle is I wake up, I have breakfast with my wife and son, I walk them to daycare, and then I come home and sit up my computer and get to work. So I think it's been a huge benefit to my lifestyle. And that's really what we're trying to do at Loft is connect more people to this kind of work life freedom, we call it.
So how did this lead up to Loft and its founding?
Yeah, so Loft, is kind of it was a really exciting thing for me to be involved with. And as I mentioned, I grew up on the East Coast and grew up in a town of 2,000 people on Prince Edward Island. Opportunities to join tech startups were not, everywhere. So, it was difficult, but I always tried to kind of blaze my own trail. And after high school, went and lived in Scotland, and I ended up living in Egypt and France and Australia,
Oh,
Uganda. I've lived all over the world. And, when I came back to Toronto, I got an opportunity to work in e-learning and educational and technology. And it was a great introduction to the tech world. And I'd always been passionate about computers, but this was something that I could really sink my teeth into. And when I was working there, I got to meet Graham. And Graham was is the founder of Loft. He's the CEO. He was consulting for the organization that I worked with, and every time he came in, we would talk philosophy, we would talk design, we would spend hours talking about it. And eventually he approached me and said, hey, I got this vision for this thing I want to build. I think you'd be a great person to join the team. And, he invited me into it. I was able to contribute to it. And, it's been just, such an adventure. If I said that it was a straight path, I would totally be lying. COVID was incredibly difficult. We won this contract with the government of Canada 5 years ago that I've worked on every day for 5 years, and we've just opened our first space. So,
wow.
you can't give up in these kind of things, but it's been the adventure of a lifetime. So just truly grateful to just get to test myself and prove what I can do.
So explain Loft a little bit more to us, and maybe, some of the points of difference, because I mean, like most businesses, not the first um, space of its kind.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, co-working's been around for a long time, and I think obviously WeWork was a big part of that. It popularized it in a way that we could have, never really anticipated. It grew so quickly, but it also carried a ton of baggage and maybe had a model that didn't quite work. So for us, we don't really see ourselves as a co-working company. We see ourselves as a flexible workspace network. Our vision is different in that co-working companies generally will take out 3 to 5, floors in a tower downtown. they make the office more Instagrammable, a bit more aesthetic, but they basically are doing lease arbitrage.
Hmm.
For us, we want to be a revenue generating amenity that property developers and landlords install within their properties to drive foot traffic, to create spillover effect, and to generate revenue as well. For Loft, we also envision operating in all property verticals. So we don't want to just be in office towers downtown. We want to be in airports, conference centers, hotels, hospitals, retail environments, self storage, street level. I mean, store in store concepts. We really believe that people want to work everywhere because you can get an email, you can get a phone call, and you have to be able to jump onto it fairly quickly, especially when you've become untethered from that 9 to 5 desk. So recreating a new distributed workforce infrastructure is what we're passionate about, and that happens through this on-demand network, very kind of Uber meets the consistency of a Starbucks like experience.
So you mentioned the different types of buildings. I think it was pretty cool. I was looking through some of the sites. As you said, some are in self-storage. Um, how do you come up with that idea? Because and tell the listeners, because I don't want them to think that you're just rolling up doors and locking them in or something. But it looked really cool.
Well, I think Ken, you were mentioning one of your children who lives in a small condo, and that's the reality for a lot of us. When I first moved to Toronto, I lived in a bachelor pad, basically with my partner, who's now my wife. I think it was tiny. There was one room. We couldn't get away from each other. She was studying for the LSATs. I wasn't allowed to breathe. So it was it was definitely difficult, and a lot of people find themselves in that situation today. And with the explosion of e-commerce entrepreneurship, especially with everything that Shopify has done, you have these people who are storing all of their goods in their small condos, and they're trying to do fulfillment, and they're running a business out of their home. And it's really difficult. So, we saw an opportunity to work with the self-storage industry to combine storage and workspace. And really, our clients can go in, they have a full office that's separate. We don't put them in a storage unit, with offices, boardrooms, desks, and then they can go into the storage section, retrieve their goods, do fulfillment, and then put their goods back at the end of the day. And it's really a seamless experience. So, we think that one makes a lot of sense, and it's been proved to be pretty effective. So yeah, we think it's exciting for, kind of this explosion of entrepreneurship that the e-commerce industry has created.
And I didn't think about it that way when I saw it. I was imagining that you were putting up, or somebody was putting up self-storage, and there was just a clean, dry premises that you opened up in. I never thought of the tie between possible inventory or storage for the business.
Yeah, we actually have, beyond e-commerce entrepreneurs, we've had lawyers who've done it, people who want to get rid of their offices. They take all of their files because, in the legal profession,
Yeah.
a lot still runs on paper. But they store it in, a secure unit that they can access throughout the day. So there's a lot of different use cases when you kind of create these new work integration experiences, which is what we're passionate about.
Hmm. And you also have an event space that you opened in Toronto. It's sort
Yeah,
of
we
adjacent
do.
again. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. We're really excited about that space. It's in a heritage building downtown on King Street. Beautiful exposed brick. We designed it to be really intimate and warm, with still a bit of an industrial vibe. We've had charities, we've had networking events, we've had parties, weddings, so many different things. And one of the things I'm proudest about is we've actually layered in a gallery as well. So we've been working with local artists in Toronto to bring their work into our space. They have gallery shows, when we work with the artist community to actually provide, better revenue splits than they would get at a traditional art gallery. Because for us, it brings people into the space, it gives it a
Right.
vibe. And then for them, it gives them more control and ownership over their work.
Nice. A nice sort of tie into the greater community.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I mean, our founder Graham, he's a serial entrepreneur, and he has been running clothing stores. D Train was his first one. Then he ran an urban design agency, Urban DNA, and then now with Loft. As a Black founder, he's always been very tied in with the Black community, and I think this is a really exciting opportunity for him to provide this event space to the community. So our curator is actually an artist named Elixir. He's been at the AGO. He's brought in tons of artists from his world. So it's really an incredible space where our vision of on-demand event space, and the unit next door is the workspace, and also serving the community where we work. On every loft workspace you go into, it says locally grown, globally known. And our idea
Hmm.
is that if we can serve the communities that we work in, they will take us to the world stage that we want to play on.
Jesse, just to continue, so on your website, one of the things it talks about is moving forward with passion, curiosity, and innovation, turning fear into inspiration. And then it says lighting the way for others. That's a pretty inspirational addition. Where does that come from?
Yeah, I think it comes from audacity. We have this core value of audacity where people often think things are too impossible or can't be done, too radical until someone steps up and does it. And that's always been something I've really believed in is stop talking and get to work and show what you can do. And I was listening to one of your episodes last night with the guest Yannick Benjamin,
Hmm.
and he was saying something about people need to see something before they can actually believe in it. And it was around the education of educating people with disabilities on how they can be included in the hospitality industry. And that's really so key to what we're trying to do too. From my experience in e-learning, and then I spent 2 years as a teacher. We really want to educate people on to rethink how they can work. We have the tools, we have the experience, we just need to keep proving that this distributed work model actually benefits everyone, employers and employees alike. So it's an audacious goal to kind of reimagine how people work. But I think if we can free people from this old school notion of having to sit at a desk 9 to 5 to be productive, it really lights the path for others to follow.
Very cool. So the other thing you mentioned too is, I mean, you work within the community, the local community, you talk about artists and the event space in Toronto and whatnot. How do you foster community within the space? Because when I looked at it, a lot of it seems to be, you can rent by the hour, rent by the half day or whatnot. Is that more of a transient model, or is that just how you invoice, if you will?
Yeah, so kind of the both. I mean, we invoice by the hour or by the day, but we also have people who use it once a quarter when they're in town. We also
Hmm.
have people who use it every single day. So for us, it's not just about, when we set out, we on our website it used to say for freelancers, consultants, and entrepreneurs, and people who kind of looked like us. And we thought those would be the people who would need the service the most. But as we began operating, we started to realize that by decreasing all these barriers to access with leases and contracts and going to an hourly billing model, we were actually bringing in book clubs and esports tournaments and students and therapists and all of these use cases that you could never imagine in a traditional co-working environment. So, for me, it's always been about how do we create accidental collisions? And, Steve Jobs has always been someone who's really inspired me, and especially his time at Pixar, and creating these moments of connection by, reimagining the distribution of employees through an office space. I've experienced that in offices on a foosball table where, you would play with legal or marketing and sales, and it inspires new ideas. So if you can bring those kind of collisions to a municipal, provincial, or nationwide level, to me, that's, a really exciting part of the remote work innovation engine that allows us to use those diverse perspectives that we're colliding with to, create services and products that serve a wider group.
And the other thing you mentioned too was the government, and I obviously don't speak to something you're not allowed to, but I'm just wondering in general, as larger organizations downsize, are you starting to manage these or welcome them to these type of settings where they can, have their have their people drop in as needed?
Definitely. And, the Canadian government's been incredibly innovative in this space. They've had the GC co-working spaces for over a decade. It's been something that they've always seen as a way to, help people work closer to home, do this hot desking where it can be more efficient than having a dedicated desk per employee. You need less office space, less furniture, less equipment. So it's actually a far more efficient way of working. And, 5 years ago, I participated in the RFI. Then I wrote the RFP over 3 months in painstaking detail, 300 pages. And then eventually we won. And, we'd gone up against some of the titans of our industry. And for a small, scrappy startup like us, who's basically bootstrapped ourselves into existence, it was a massive, monumental win. Then came the navigating the data privacy and cybersecurity and the design guidelines. And, that took a long time and a lot of effort. But, we persevered through everything. We've achieved everything. And now we're open and operating and serving Canada's public servants in the National Capital Region. So, we have our first site open now, but we really hope to drive this nationwide with, Canada's largest employer.
Well, that is great to hear on so many levels. And this is the first time I've ever heard, and the Canadian government has been so innovative on a specific level. And you know what? I actually say that with great joy and happiness because why not? Why have all of these monolithic buildings being paid for by all of us when it's not required? I think it's phenomenal.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, Ken. And I think the government, is can create an appetite for what will come next, and other organizations can say, "Hey, they're doing it," like maybe that will work for us too. And they're on this path of property portfolio divestment. They want to get rid of 50% of their properties nationwide, going from 6 million square feet down to 3 million. And, as a taxpayer and someone, I've been a legislative page, I've volunteered on lots of campaigns. I, love politics. This makes me feel really excited. This is, access to government. This is putting government in the communities that they serve, where, we can build these workspaces that also can be both public sector and private sector. So their tenancy actually creates workspaces within the communities that they work that nonprofits can access, charities can access, entrepreneurs can access. So instead of them being in, a monolith, as I've gone into these government offices in downtown Ottawa, and you need a schematic to find your way anywhere. And one of the greatest anecdotes came from one of our new trial users at the space who said, when I go into the office, I never know if my teammates are going to be there. I can't find them. It's so big. So being able to book through our reservation software beside who you're going to be sitting with, inviting them to the work session. We have a visibility toggle where you can allow yourself to be visible to your team members in the app. And they were really excited about it. They got to sit together and collaborate. So I think, we've seen this type of approach in different countries. Australia, Ireland, they have crown corporations that have built out co-working hubs across the nation. And, I think it's a really exciting way to innovate how people work. So all kudos to the government of Canada.
No, it sounds like it, and I'm the first to recognize when something is cool and moving forward. So yes, I'll join you on that. So have you moved any space back into PEI yet?
Not yet. I certainly want to, and I have a few friends who work with the federal government, the Department of Veterans Affairs and Statistics Canada on the island, who are like, "Hey, when do we get one of these cool loft spaces?" Because a lot of the times, a lot of these buildings have gone unmaintained for a long time. They don't really serve our public servants in the way that can help them be the most
Mhm.
productive and collaborative. Um, but right now, this is really just a pilot and a trial with the PSPC, Public Service Procurement Canada, to kind of prove that this concept works, that they can go to a private supplier who can deliver a service that's cost effective, good for the crown, and good for the communities that we serve. And I think that's what we're proving.
Oh, that's great. And I do hope you get, that stake in the ground back in PEI to show how a tech slash, physical working space have come together and come out of, in part, from that island. So I want to just leave with one last question. Though. You mentioned earlier on all the different places you lived in. What took you to all these countries?
Uh, I mean, I think growing up in a small town, you think, God, the world's got to be bigger than this. And really, I credit my sister, who, after high school, she took off for Europe for a couple years, and was really the first person in our high school to do that. And after her, the floodgates kind of opened, and all these kids from Montague PEI started going off and traveling, through Europe and living in the UK and France and so I rode her coattails and moved to Edinburgh, lived there for a year, came back, did my university at Dal, finished my university up at the Université de Bourgogne in France in Dijon. Had an incredible time. From there, I went to Australia, where I pursued my love of kayaking. I was a kayaking guide and for almost a decade. Then I left for Egypt, where I was passionate about politics and, got to witness the Arab Spring firsthand, in moonlit as a photojournalist while I taught social studies during the day. And then my wife and I moved to Uganda, where, she got to work on, she worked for the International Refugee Rights Initiative, getting to apply her work as an immigration lawyer. And I had an incredible time. I worked with local startups, Safe Boda. I'll give them a shout out. They're an incredible kind of Uber-like taxi service in Uganda. I think they're operating in Kenya now too. So yeah, I mean, getting to travel and meet people all around the world, you kind of realize how small you are, and but also that you can create amazing things, and people were so alike. We all just want to create more time in our days to be with the people we love, and really that's a huge part of what Loft does is trying to optimize your day so you have more time to spend it with the people you love and doing the things you love.
Well, Jesse Sharratt, co-founder and COO of LAUFT, thank you so much for joining me today on Say Hi to the Future.
Thank you so much for having me, Ken. I truly appreciate the invite.